Welcome back! In this lecture, I'll show you how to install Ubuntu in a virtual machine. We'll use VirtualBox because it's free, but you can use VMware as well. The hardware requirements for Ubuntu Desktop Edition are at least 2 GB of RAM and 20 GB free space on your disk. From my experience, I can tell you that an SSD hard drive is also very important for a smooth run. The first step is to download the VirtualBox installer for your OS, probably Windows or Mac. The installer can be found on the download page here. Download the binary version for Windows, Mac or Linux. It's downloading. It's done. After downloading it, run the executable to begin installing the software. The installation process is straightforward. Just click Next a few times and at the end finish. We won't go deeper into this because it's really simple. After installing VirtualBox, it's recommended to install VirtualBox extension pack on the host machine to unlock advanced VirtualBox features such as support for USB devices, flash drives, and many more. So download the VirtualBox extension pack from the same address and install it. There's a single file for all platforms. This is the file. It was already downloaded. Double-click the file, confirm the installation, and click the Install button. We are done with VirtualBox and we'll go ahead and download Ubuntu. In case you are wondering, Ubuntu is an African word meaning humanity, and it's often translated as humanity towards others. The latest version of Ubuntu uses the GNOME shell as the default graphical user interface, and this makes a resourceful system. If you only have an older system available, you could try a lightweighter desktop environment such as XFCE that runs on Xubuntu, or LXDE, which runs on Lubuntu. We are talking about the same system, only the GUI being different. I'm also a fan of Linux Mint, which has a very friendly user interface. If you have enough space on your disk, you can try them all. There are 3 possibilities for the installation. To install it as the main OS, and in this case, we download the provided ISO file, create a bootable USB disk using a special software, and then boot up the machine using the USB disk. I'd recommend you to do so only after you get used to it a little. The second option is to use it live, and that means that Ubuntu will not be installed on your machine, but will run directly from a USB disk. And the third option is to install it as a virtual machine. This is the recommended way for beginners because there's no risk of breaking your main system. You can also download and try many other Linux distributions to see which fits you better. The same steps shown in this video will apply to any other Linux distribution. We go ahead and download the latest LTS version of Ubuntu. LTS stands for long-term support, which means 5 years of free security and maintenance updates. Ubuntu 20.04 is available only as a 64 version. There isn't a 32-bit version. Note that Ubuntu follows a biannual release cycle, with one release coming in April and other in October. An Ubuntu release has the version number in the format year, that month. So Ubuntu 20.04 was released in the 4th month, April, of the year 2020. Besides the version number, each Ubuntu release has also a code name, Focal Fossa being the code name for Ubuntu 20.04. It's almost done. Note that you also need a good internet connection to download the Linux ISO file and update the software. I've already downloaded the ISO file to save time, and now it's on my desktop. Start VirtualBox and click on the new icon to create a new virtual machine. Give it a relevant name like Ubuntu 20.04. Its type will be Linux and its version Ubuntu 64-bit. Click Next. The next step is to allocate RAM to the VM. 4 GB is recommended, but if it's not possible, allocate at least 2 GB or something in between. Bear in mind, the more RAM you allocate, the faster it will run. Note that you can change this value anytime so you can test different values. Now it's time to create a virtual disk. This serves as the hard disk of the virtual Linux system. It is where Ubuntu will store its files and it's completely isolated in a single disk file. Click Next and leave the default selection for the hard disk file type. In this step, leave the default selection, which is dynamically allocated. The disk file will only use space on your physical hard disk as it fills up, till the maximum fixed size you'll be setting up in the next step. Now it's time to select the file location and size. I'd recommend you to use 20 GB or more. If possible, for maximum performance, the location should be on an SSD disk. I'll leave the default location and click Create. Now, it's time to boot the Ubuntu ISO we've just downloaded and install Linux as a virtual operating system. I'm selecting the VM and clicking Start. Now I have to select the startup file, which is the ISO file. I'll browse to its location on my desktop by clicking the folder icon. In this window, I'm clicking Add and going to my desktop to select it. The ISO file was selected and I'm clicking Choose and then Start. Now it's time when you can get an error related to AMDV or VTX while trying to start the VM. This means that the virtualization or VTX is disabled in your computer BIOS. Reboot your system and access the BIOS settings using a function key that is specific for a computer or laptop model. Look for something related to virtualization or VTX and enable it. Save, restart the system, and then start the VM again. Let's return to the Ubuntu installation. It has started, and in a few seconds, I am presented with two options. I could try it as a live OS, or I could install it. And of course, I'm clicking Install Ubuntu. In this window, I can choose the keyboard layout. In my case, it's English US. In this window, I'll leave the default options, which are normal installation and download updates while installing Ubuntu. This option requires an active internet connection since it will update the system while installing it. The installation process will take a longer time. Now, depending on what you want to do and how quickly you want to install it, you can leave this option unchecked or not. You can also update the system anytime after installing it. I'll select both options and click Continue. If, like myself, you install Ubuntu in a VM, leave the default option and click Install Now. If you are installing Ubuntu as your main operating system, this step is very important. The default option will delete all your data and you'll format your disk. Maybe you want to try a custom installation type by selecting something else. You'll be able to manually select, create, and format your partitions. However, make a good backup of your files in this case. I'm clicking Install Now. Select your location and click Continue. And in the last step, write your name and your computer's. The computer name will be the host name that will be displayed as part of the prompter. Pick up a username and choose a password. Student and the password. And you are done. Depending on your hardware and your selections, it may take around 10 minutes to complete the installation. I'm pausing the recording until it's done. The installation is complete and I'll restart it to log into the system. If it gets stuck on this screen, you may choose to close VirtualBox. And if you want to save space on your disk, you can delete the ISO file. It's not necessary anymore. Once restarted, I can log into Ubuntu with the user and password specified at installation. Great! The network card is put into net mode, so I can access the internet as well. I'm starting Firefox. I'm also starting a terminal to check the internet connection. I want to ping an IP address. Ping is working. And let's check a popular website like youtube.com. If you can't maximize the window, don't worry, because I'll show you how to fix it in the next lecture. That's how you install Ubuntu as a VM in VirtualBox. In the next video, I'll show you the top things to do after installing it. See you in a second.